Most players fail because they move too fast. They lose information. They stop reading the room. And then every decision after that becomes reactive. But if you want to get better, this is what you have to pay attention to. The real skill gap in 007 First Light probably won't be aim. It'll be understanding the stealth rules IO Interactive has been perfecting for years in Hitman. Because most players enter stealth games thinking fast movement and quick reactions are what keep them alive. Usually it's the opposite though. The players who dominate these systems are normally the calmest players. They understand visibility, timing, access, information. They just know how stealth games and stealth systems think. And if 007 First Light follows the same design philosophy as Hitman, these mechanics are probably going to matter a lot more than people realize. Not because Bond suddenly becomes Agent 47, but because good infiltration games usually reward the same fundamentals. So if you want to adapt quickly when First Light releases, these are the mechanics you should already be paying attention to. Alright, starting with the mechanic that quietly controls almost every stealth encounter, which is line of sight. Now, most players think stealth starts when they crouch. It doesn't. Stealth starts the moment an enemy can see you. That sounds obvious, I know, but most stealth failures happen before the player even moves. They enter rooms too early, cross open spaces too confidently, expose themselves without even reading the environment first. Good stealth players though are constantly managing visibility, angles, sightlines, distance, doorways, it doesn't matter. They're not just hiding, they're controlling exposure. And that becomes even more important in layered environments where enemies can watch multiple spaces at once. The important shift is realizing movement itself is not the goal. Safe movement is. You don't move because there's an opening, you move because you understand the opening. You know what I'm saying? And that's a huge difference. And honestly, this is where a lot of players immediately separate themselves from the system, because the moment pressure appears, they start moving too fast. This is where stealth usually collapses at, you know what I'm saying? Where you just go to acting sporadically. But most players fail because they move too fast. They lose information. They stop reading the room. And then every decision after that becomes reactive, which is normal. We're all, you know what I'm saying? We all play the game differently. We all have to learn. But if you want to get better, this is what you have to pay attention to. Good stealth players look patient because they understand something important. Speed creates mistakes, control creates options. That's why experienced Hitman players rarely force movement after getting spotted. They reset, they reposition, they let the situation cool down, because stealth systems punish panic harder than aggression. But the good thing is that 007 First Light is actually going to be rewarding gameplay such as aggression and combat. Sometimes it's not about surviving it clean though. That's a major difference. Hitman teaches prevention. Bond will probably reward recovery, and honestly, that balance might end up defining the entire stealth identity for First Light. But none of that works without intel, and that's our second fundamental. It's gathering intel. Stealth is really about information. The best stealth players usually know the map before they move. You know what I'm saying? Studying and playing and understanding the map. They listen to conversations, they track patrol routes, notice blind spots, watch patterns, identify exits before even entering danger. And the players who struggle in stealth games usually aren't impatient, they're uninformed. They move before they understand the space. That's why intel changes everything. The moment you understand how an environment functions, stealth stops feeling random. You stop guessing, you start predicting. And prediction is what makes stealth feel controlled. You know what I'm saying? That's something we touched on in the Stealth Assassin versus Improvising Agent breakdown too. So if you want to see that, it's right here at the top. But anyway, the moment players stop reading the environment, stealth starts collapsing, because stealth systems reward awareness more than reflexes. You know what I'm saying? The players who survive these situations usually aren't reacting faster than everyone else. They simply understand the space better. And that's really what it comes down to. Actually, I'm curious about this. Out of all these mechanics, Which one do you think is going to matter most in 007 First Light? I really want to know. Drop it down in the comments. Is it line of sight, intel, access systems? Y'all let me know, because depending on how IO structures mission design, one of these mechanics is probably going to control the entire pacing of the game, you know what I mean? And once you understand information, the next mechanic becomes incredibly powerful, which is luring. A distraction is basically a temporary opening. That's all it is. You create noise, you redirect attention, you move while the system is looking somewhere else. But the important thing is this: great stealth players usually manipulate guards without touching them. That's the real skill. You're controlling enemy behavior, not overpowering enemies directly. And that mindset changes the way stealth feels completely. Instead of asking, how do I get past this guard? You start asking, how do I make the guard move? You know what I'm saying? That's a much smarter way to think, because movement becomes easier when attention moves first. And if First Light includes sound gadgets, environmental distractions, or social manipulation systems that we've been seeing over the past few months, players familiar with this style of thinking will probably adapt extremely quickly. But eventually, stealth systems push back, and that's where enforcers come in. And that's our next fundamental, is learning the enforcers. This is usually, the moment stealth stops feeling comfortable. And like, for example, in Hitman, enforcers are like the NPCs that recognize suspicious behavior faster than everyone else. Like they're able to spot you no matter what costume you're using or what disguise you're using. And the wrong guard noticing you changes a lot. One high awareness enemy can completely destroy a stealth route, which is exactly why they matter, because stealth becomes boring if every enemy reacts the same exact way. Dangerous NPCs force players to slow down, to study movement and stuff, to respect positioning. That's key. And good stealth players learn something important very quickly. Not every enemy controls the space equally. Some guards are just background noise. Others completely define the risk level of an area. You know what I'm saying? Identifying those enemies early is usually what separates average stealth players from advanced ones. And once you understand threat recognition, the final mechanic starts becoming incredibly important, which is access. And honestly, this might be the biggest stealth concept overall, because stealth games are often less about hiding and more about belonging. That's the real difference. The moment a game introduces restricted spaces, stealth changes completely, you know what I'm saying? Now, the environment starts questioning whether you should even be around. It's like if you ever seen that movie, Inception, where if you're in the dream starts noticing you, because, you know what I'm saying? Like that whole concept is like that. And in Hitman, gaining access is what transforms impossible spaces into manageable ones. A disguise, a maintenance route, an invitation, a security opening, it doesn't matter. Whatever the method is, the principle stays the same. You're solving entry problems. And if First Light builds heavily around infiltration, access systems will probably control the entire flow of missions, because y'all know how Bond get. You got to get in, get out, finesse his way, and he just makes it up as he goes along. You know what I'm saying? Because restricted areas create tension automatically. Movement changes, timing changes, decision-making changes. The environment itself becomes just straight hostile. And personally, I think this is where stealth games become the most interesting, because this is where planning and improvisation finally collide. You know what I'm saying? So I'm curious about this one too. Do you think stealth games are better when they reward careful planning, or when they force players to improvise after things go wrong? Y'all let me know. Drop it in the comments, because the best stealth system usually balances both. And honestly, that balance might end up being the thing that defines 007 First Light. At the end of the day, these aren't just Hitman mechanics, they're stealth fundamentals: visibility control, information gathering, attention manipulating, threat recognition, access management. These systems show up over and over again because they create stealth gameplay that feels readable, tactical, and rewarding. And if 007 First Light builds on those same foundations, players who already understand these ideas are probably going to adapt much faster than everybody else. Not because they memorize the mechanics, but because they learn how stealth systems just actually work. And honestly, once more gameplay starts releasing, there's going to be a lot to break down. Mission structure, social stealth, enemy behavior, infiltration infiltration routes, improvisation systems, all that, the whole 9 yards, everything. And I'm going to be covering it, because if IO Interactive really leans into what made Hitman's stealth design work, 007 First Light could end up becoming one of the most interesting stealth games we've had in years. So with that being said, subscribe if you want more breakdowns, guides, tips, and tricks. I'll be here first day, first light. Y'all catch me later. I'm out.